Americast from BBC News.
Hello, it's Justin in the worldwide headquarters of Americast in London, England.
And it's Anthony in the Washington Bureau of BBC News.
And it is Mariana, aka Misinformation, still not back in the worldwide headquarters, but still in Greece.
Well, you're missing out on some excitement here, Mariana. It has been an incredibly busy time in the U.S. for political news. And if you Americasters want the latest, do make sure you subscribe to the podcast on BBC Sounds. It's all there. But right now, as we say, this episode is going to step back and look at campaign finances.
And you can send us a WhatsApp on +44 330 123 9480.
And if you have the kind of bank balance that number sort of equates to, then you will be particularly interested this week because, this week, what am I talking about? We're doing this every day. Anyway, you will be interested because we are going to talk completely about money, and we're going to do it right now with someone who knows more about campaign finances than most, who knows an awful lot about the way money is raised, but also, crucially, on the way it is spent and the impact that it has on American politics. Sarah Briner is Director of Research and Strategy from Open Secrets, which is a research group. It tracks the money, the lobbying, the conflicts of interest, both real and potential, the effect that all of this money has on elections and indeed on policy. Sarah, hello, and thank you for joining us.
I am so happy to be here.
Well, it's really good to talk to you because, as I was saying, you really do know about this stuff. And I think probably the place to start is with the basics, actually. So how does it work? Who can donate money? Who typically does donate money? And you think of all those small amounts that people are allowed to give. Kind of talk us through what the process is.
Yeah, sure. So anyone who is an American citizen can donate to American politicians. But ultimately, you're not going to give $25 to a politician when you're in the lower income brackets. You need that $25 to pay your electric bill or to buy some bread or whatever. So we're talking more about people of means. And that's just for the small donors. The other side of the coin is that we also have people donating millions and millions of dollars to American political groups. So who gives? Wealthier and upper middle class and middle class people. As for the mechanics, there are a lot of rules. So you can give directly to a candidate, but that money is limited in how much you can give. You can give to super PACs, which are political committees that support candidates. That money is unlimited in how much you can give, but the super PAC can't give it to the candidate. They can't coordinate. You can give it to the party, and that money is limited, but in bigger amounts. You can give it to political groups like the NRA, and then they can do with it what they want. So really, the possibilities are endless if you have a well-stocked bank account.
Yeah, and what really fascinates us this time round is what happens to that money, and in a sense, whether it's worth raising it in the kind of amounts that we talk about. Because Mariana, do you remember we had that conversation with Jake Tapper, who Sarah will know very well? Jake Tapper, who told us about going viral and never quite knowing what does go viral and what doesn't go viral in the modern world. And that just seems to me to be really important when it comes to what you get for your money in this day and age. In other words, you can't be assured. You used to just run a TV ad, didn't you? And nowadays, in Mariana's world, which is increasingly all of our worlds, you can't, can you?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've really noticed, I'm sure you've probably spotted this, Sarah, as well, and Anthony and Justin, as we've chatted about, is how, particularly since Kamala Harris has announced that she's running, this kind of massive, very loud, online, organic social media movement. And organic is the word we use for content that doesn't necessarily feel like it's coming specifically from the campaign itself or is necessarily super organized, like you say, Justin, like a TV ad. Instead, it's all this stuff we've been chatting about, the coconut tree meme, which is this clip of Kamala Harris talking about something her mum used to say about falling out of a coconut tree, this whole Brat Summer thing, which the teams and the accounts supporting Kamala Harris have really embraced. So Brat Summer is all about Charlie XCX, who's a British pop star, and she's got an album out called Brat, and people are saying that some of Kamala Harris's stuff kind of aligns with some of the stuff she talks about in her songs, and so they've accepted Kamala Harris as a brat, to quote, and all of that has just absolutely taken social media by storm. And what strikes me is that really kind of cost very much money. I mean, it costs a bit of money now if you decide you want to, let's like kind of push this on our own social media platforms, and let's reshare the memes, and let's create our own content. But broadly, this stuff is really, really cheap. It's like creating a banner on your profile on Twitter, or resharing a video that someone's just made at home. And that's obviously something that Donald Trump in particular has been very good at, kind of capitalizing on these online fandoms, so to speak, who will create content in support of him, who will share it. And it's really, really cheap. I don't know what you think about that, Sarah, in terms of where your money can and should go when it comes to particularly social media advertising.
Because you can't buy bratness. I know that. I've tried.
You know what it is now.
Work.
You know what it is.
I now know what it is, but I still don't think I could buy it.
As much as you might want to. I think that it is tricky because you can't predict when that social media storm is going to happen. But there are two things that I think really mobilized donors this cycle. One is obviously the switch between Biden and Harris. And you can buy a better social media staffer or a social media staff army. And that's, you get what you pay for, right? Like you can get a college intern, or you can get a highly professional person who knows what they're doing. So there is a money story there a little bit. But in Trump's case, his most effective fundraising days were when he was convicted of 34 felonies and after he got shot. And so getting convicted of the felonies was expensive to him, but that's not really a money story. So there is definitely this swell of support that can happen and that you can't control. And I think that just goes to show that money isn't everything, but it does matter.
Sarah, you talk about this distinction between campaigns and candidates and political action committees, PACs, and how they're different things, and there are rules for donating and limits to donating to candidates, but not to PACs. And I think our audience might be a little confused by that. I mean, these super PACs, what are they, and can they support candidates? They can't coordinate, but is there really a difference? I mean, or is this just a distinction under the law, but in reality, you give to Donald Trump's super PAC and you're giving money that he will use or will be used to support him?
It really has become a distinction without a difference. Super PACs were created in the aftermath of Citizens United, which was this big Supreme Court case in 2010 that said that donating money was essentially free speech, and you can't limit that. You can draw boundaries around it, which is to say that you can't say, I'm going to give $1 million to Donald Trump directly, because that opens up, in the Supreme Court's opinion, more opportunities for corruption. But you can give to Trump-aligned groups, and they can do with it what they will. I don't think that there is a ton of direct coordination where the campaign says, hey, I want you, Super PAC, to do this thing on this day. And that's because they don't have to do that. They can say, I'm going to put a bunch of videos of myself on YouTube, and anyone can grab them. It's Creative Commons. Have fun with that. And so they don't have to. Ultimately, the messaging is fairly well understood, and the super PACs just have the ability to raise so much more money. When we talk about like Trump fundraising or Harris or Biden fundraising, we usually lump together the super PACs with the candidate committees, and I think that just goes to show how little a difference there is.
Right. I remember a few years ago, there was just B-roll of Mitch McConnell, who was running for Senate re-election, just kind of nodding and walking around, just released onto the internet. And it was obvious that they were doing that so their super PAC could grab it and turn it into campaign
That was the greatest.
Or you had Ron DeSantis, who was...
Yeah, they called it McConnelling.
You had Ron DeSantis, who was in...
Really? It's a word, McConnelling.
You had Ron DeSantis, who was...
McConnelling.
That's fantastic.
And you also had Ron DeSantis, who was basically campaigning on the back of his super
Yes.
PAC in Iowa, being the special guest of this super PAC. There wasn't coordination, but they were inviting him on just to host him at these essentially campaign events in Iowa. I mean, it's almost gotten to the point where it's absurd.
Yeah, it's hard to say that there isn't, these direct lines and that it's really not that different anymore. I mean, there are specific rules for the super PAC spending that candidates don't have to follow, like they get cheaper media buys, candidates do. But ultimately, it all goes to support the same cause, and people know that.
And the other thing is, if you break the rules, you may not get penalized for that until after the campaign's over. So there's a certain amount of incentive to, do first and ask permission later.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, as Donald Trump has discovered, they do eventually catch up with you, but it can be quite a long time. And then it then leads to more money coming to your campaign, as Sarah tells us.
Yes.
Should we... Can I ask you this, Sarah? It just fascinates me, and it's been widely reported, hasn't it, that Donald Trump is among those who once contributed to a Kamala Harris campaign when she was Attorney General in California. And there is, and I think it's true. I think he did, and she later says she gave the money to charity or something. But why would he have done that? So he gave, I think I'm right in saying, more than $1 million when he was a businessman to various campaigns, Democrat and Republican. I mean, what is he buying?
Yeah. Back then, he was buying either access or good press. And people with money like to give to candidates who can ultimately open the doors for them later on, approve a building permit, just take a shiny photo so that the person looks like they have good connections. So, you're buying that access, you're buying that, connection, and you also want to support people who will win. And so if Harris looked like she was in a position to win, you wanted to be seen as a backer of that. He gave to Republicans and Democrats. He was sort of center giving. Clearly, since then, he has become much more aligned with the far right and has sort of aligned the far right around himself. But back in the early part of the century in the late 90s, he was much more of a status quo type giver. Because he needed to be. He needed to be so that he could build those buildings and get those golf courses and, grease those palms. He doesn't have to do that anymore. And so clearly, things have evolved.
Related to that point, Sarah, but thinking about backers and who's donating to who and so on, one thing that I've really noticed is the way that the people who are often dubbed the tech bros, the very powerful people in Silicon Valley, the kind of tech billionaires. So Elon Musk, for example, only one quick look at his feed on X will tell you exactly who he's supporting, which is Donald Trump. And he announced that kind of straight after the assassination attempt happened, and he's continued to post that kind of content on his feed. But not just him, people like Peter Thiel as well, who was kind of one of the key backers of Facebook and founder of PayPal and so on. Why do you think these tech bros are throwing their weight behind Trump in this way this time around? Because before it felt like they were always kind of trying to, people like Mark Zuckerberg, for example, or other tech bosses were trying to kind of have this bit of distance between them and Trump, particularly when they were accused of, perhaps promoting his stuff over other people's stuff and making elections not fair and all that kinds of stuff. Why do you think that some of them have sort of changed their mind or are being so vocal this time in a way they haven't before?
I think it's two things. One is that Trump does social media, or did before he got banned from various platforms, did social media like no one else. So anytime he says anything, it's a flurry. And a flurry on social media is more money for these companies. So that's one. The second is that I think Trump, at least 2 weeks ago, looked like he was all but a sure bet to win. That was what the mood of the country was. And that actually coincided with all of these people, with the assassination attempt and with all of these tech bros coming out of the woodwork to support him. Like I said, you want to back a winner. You don't want to back a loser. Also, I will say that it is really interesting to me that Musk claimed, or that it was widely reported that Musk was going to give $45 million a month to support Trump, and that 2 days after Biden dropped out of the race and it looked all of a sudden like the shakeup was going to happen, Trump walked back that number by a lot. Or not Trump, Musk walked back that number by a lot. So, like I said, you want to back a winner. And for a while there, Trump looked like he was definitely going to be a winner. Now things are a little bit more uncertain, and you see the support, at least monetarily, sort of getting a little bit fuzzier. So I think that's, ultimately what's going on.
It strikes me as well that there's quite an interesting conversation about, there's increasing pressure on the social media companies when it comes to regulation and the risk that legislation could be introduced and so on. And someone like Elon Musk has made very clear that the First Amendment and kind of protecting freedom of expression ranks above all else on his site. And that seems to align perhaps more closely with a Donald Trump than it does a Kamala Harris. And so that could be playing a part, but I guess it's hard to get in the mind of the tech bros.
Yeah, I try not to.
I tell you what, as well, though, there's a real conflict potentially, isn't there, between the tech bros' agenda, as it were, and we know what that is, and it's making a lot of money for them and their companies and getting more and more eyeballs and all the rest of it. And the kind of sense that you got, certainly at the Republican convention, they had a union leader, the boss of the Teamsters, talking to them, this whole economic populism thing. I mean, we could discuss how real it is, but the whole kind of hillbilly elegy stuff that comes from J.D. Vance actually is all about union people. It's about economic populism. It's about protecting communities, which, of course, rather famously, some of the tech bros are accused of not doing. And it's that there is a tension there, isn't there, that just strikes me as one that hasn't kind of played out yet. Actually, we don't yet know how it ends.
That's true. We don't know how it ends, but also I think that there, you touched on it. There's a messaging thing here that isn't necessarily true, right? So, and that's true for the tech bros too. Top givers, maybe the Teamsters boss, or wealthy people who claim to come from a certain background or whatever, don't necessarily represent the rank and file. And when you look at union giving and when you look at Silicon Valley giving from employees of these tech companies, they still fall in line with Democrats, labor particularly. So, what the top do and what everyone else does that's not equivalent. And I think that comes down to money, that comes down to interests, that comes down to a lot of different things, including that, individual human beings can have their own motivations, whereas industries writ large have different ones. So we're going to see how this plays out. I think that the J.D. Vance pick is particularly interesting because he does come from a more, hard scrabble background, but it's to be determined whether that's going to actually, resonate with people.
Right. And I think it's interesting. Justin makes a good point about issues that these tech companies care about. Immigration is one of them. They lean heavily on labor coming from other countries on visas that the Trump administration curtailed when they were in power, and they might again. So, that will definitely be some sort of a source of tension. Sarah, I've got a question for you about gray money. We talk about the money the campaigns have that they can spend directly. It's very out, it's open. We've talked about dark money where you don't know who the donors are to these super PACs. What is gray money, and how is that becoming a more potent force in American politics?
Sure, that is donations to super PACs, which are disclosed, but the donor is something that we don't know anything about. So a shell company. So if you give and you're giving as ABC LLC, and that means nothing to anyone, that is what we call like gray money or shadow money, partially disclosing groups. And that is the way that this is happening more. In the past, we saw money spending by groups that didn't have to disclose their donors, nonprofits, et cetera, Americans for Financial Prosperity, groups like that. Now that's happening less and less, and we're seeing more and more of sort of nonprofits giving to super PACs and the money being disclosed according to Federal Election Commission rules, but not meaningful. So I think that it's the same thing. I mean, it's the same problem. Like, it's still dark, even if we know that it is dark, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Yeah, I'll put a plug in for your website, opensecrets.org, because you really do a lot of sniffing around and trying to follow the money. I mean, how much effort does it take and how much poring over documents does it require to eventually find where this money is coming from? Are there times where you just hit a dead
Oh,
end,
yeah.
or is there a method that you have that helps come up with some information?
You do feel a little bit like a detective sometimes, looking at addresses. I've done geolocation before. I've like done Google Maps where I like look at the street view and say, that's just some random house in the middle of suburban, Cleveland. But they're giving $1 million. That's weird. You do geolocation and look at the address and it's a UPS store because they have an address that's a PO box essentially. So there is some stuff like that, but you hit dead ends all the time.
Sarah, thanks so much for talking to us. We all are fans of the Open Secrets website as well, and people around the world who listen to us now might want to have a look at it because it is all fascinating stuff. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's talk again, perhaps after the money has either bought or not bought the presidency this time round.
Thank you so much. It was such a nice time being here.
All right, well, let's keep this conversation moving along. I was remembering an old quote by Phil Gramm. He was a senator from Texas back in the 80s and 90s. He ran for president. He raised a lot of money, and he said the best friend you can have in politics is ready money. So the question is that your best friend? And can ready money, can big coffers buy the White House? Now, what do you all think, Mariana, Justin?
It's interesting you mentioned Phil Gramm because he didn't make it, did he? And
No, he didn't.
I mean, I've always thought of Phil Gramm. It's a fascinating idea, isn't it? Because he was really kind of upfront about, hey, I'm going to have. Was he from Texas? He was kind of.
He was from Texas.
Yeah, he was comfortable talking about big things, including big amounts of money, and everyone thought, oh goodness, he's gonna make it big, but he didn't. And I've seen it used in the past by those who defend money in American politics as saying, hey, look at Phil Gramm. He had all this money and he made a great fuss about it, and actually he didn't get anywhere. Or indeed, look at Jeb Bush, I suppose, in the primary, with the primary that Trump eventually won, where he burn through 100 million or something and reduced his percentage approval by a couple of points.
Yeah. It got to the point where he was sending out DVDs with his campaign video, and he had so much money he didn't know how to spend it and was just throwing it out there, and none of it made a difference against the force of nature that was Donald Trump.
Yeah. So what does that tell us? I mean, seriously, what does it tell us about the kind of balance that there is between simply being able to buy people's votes? And you look now at Kamala Harris and you look at people saying, oh, goodness, money is a proxy for enthusiasm and all that kind of thing. Is it as simple as that? Does the more money you have allow you to, I don't know, get in people? You don't really knock on doors in the modern era, do you? But what does it actually buy? That's my question, because, as we'll hear from Mariana in a second, the idea of just buying TV ads in the old way is really for the birds now, isn't it?
One thing that I do think is worth saying on this kind of idea that, donations tend to come from people who are very, very wealthy and are able to give it, is that does tend to spawn quite a few conspiracy theories in the world that I inhabit online, some of which is legitimate questions about exactly as we've been discussing, how powerful people could, leverage donations to try and impact decisions in their favor and so on, and the consequences of that, but some of which really kind of delves into the quite deep and extreme conspiracy theories about, an elaborate deep state that's looking to undermine Donald Trump, for example, at every turn. And there's been a bit of conspiracy theory content like that about Kamala Harris, a bit more general and less necessarily all about funding, but it's certainly sort of picking up steam online after what has been a pretty busy past few weeks.
Right. You see the George Soros conspiracy theories with for the Republicans and the Koch brothers, although there's only one surviving Koch brother, but that sort of thing for Republicans as well. They see the big donors behind the scenes, like puppet masters pulling the strings.
Okay, here's something you can get for free. From next week, Americast is going to be publishing episodes on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays on BBC Sounds, or indeed wherever you get your podcasts. So there we are. Not everything in life has to be paid for. It's been quite a wild ride, hasn't it, over the last 2 weeks? So much news and so many episodes that we've already brought out. We're going to make it regular now. So we're aiming not to do the emergency episodes in between those three, but I'm not making any promises. That's it.
We are
See you
in
later.
a constant
Bye.
state of emergency. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Americast.
Americast from BBC News.